of the unprincipled ruffian. "Did you save the princesses?" cried the King. "No, but I can, if your Majesty and the other parents will leave the matter entirely in my hands." "It's a rather serious matter," said the King. "My poor little Daisy." "I would ask you," said the schoolmistress with dignity, "not to attach too much importance to this event. Of course it is regrettable, but unpleasant accidents occur in all schools, and the consequences of them can usually be averted by the exercise of tact and judgment." "I ought to hang you, you know," said the King doubtfully. "No doubt," said Miss Fitzroy Robinson, "and if you do, you'll never see your Daisy again. Your duty as a parent, yes, and your duty to me, conflicting duties are very painful things." "But can I trust you?" "I may remind you," said she, drawing herself up so that the cinders rattled again, "that we exchanged satisfactory references at the commencement of our business relations." The King rose. "Well, Miss Fitzroy Robinson," he said, "I have been entirely satisfied with Daisy's progress since she has been in your charge, and I feel I cannot do better than leave this matter entirely in your able hands." The schoolmistress made him a curtsy, and he went back to his marble palace a broken-hearted monarch, with his crown all on one side, and his poor dear nose red with weeping. The select boarding establishment was shut up. Time went on, and no news came of the lost princesses. The King found but little comfort in the fact that his other child, Prince Denis, was still spared to him. Denis was all very well, and a nice little boy in his way, but a boy is not a girl. The Queen was much more broken-hearted than the King, but of course she had the housekeeping to see to, and the making of the pickles and preserves, and the young Prince's stockings to knit, so she had not much time for weeping, and after a year she said to the King, "My dear, you ought to do something to distract your mind. It's unkinglike to sit and cry all day. Now, do make an effort, do something useful, even if it's only opening a bazaar or laying a foundation stone." "I am frightened of bazaars," said the King. "They are like bees, they buzz and worry. But foundation stones—" And after that he began to sit and think sometimes without crying, and to make notes on the back of old envelopes. So the Queen felt that she had not spoken quite in vain. A month later the suggestion of foundation stones bore fruit. The King floated a company, and Fortunatus Rex and Co. became almost at once the largest speculative builders in the world. Perhaps you do not know what a speculative builder is. I'll tell you what the King and his company did, and then you will know. They bought all the pretty woods and fields they could get, and cut them up into squares, and grubbed up the trees and the grass, and put streets there, and lamp-posts, and ugly little yellow brick houses, in the hopes that people would want to live in them. And curiously enough, people did. So the King and his co. made quite a lot of money. It is curious that nearly all the great fortunes are made by turning beautiful things into ugly ones. Making beauty out of ugliness is very ill-paid work. The ugly little streets crawled further and further out of the town, eating up the green country like greedy yellow caterpillars. But at the foot of the Clover Hill they had to stop. For the owner of Clover Hill would not sell any land at all for any price that Fortunatus Rex and Co. could offer. In vain the solicitors of the company called on the solicitors of the owner, wearing their best cloaks and swords and shields, and took them out to lunch and gave them nice things to eat and drink. Clover Hill was not for sale. At last, however, a little old woman, all in grey, called at the company's shining brass and mahogany offices, and had a private interview with the King himself. "I am the owner of Clover Hill," said she, "and you may build on all its acres except the 7 at the top and the 15 acres that go round that 7, and you must build me a high wall round the 7 acres, and another round the 15, of red brick, mind, none of your cheap yellow stuff. And you must make a brand new law that anyone who steals my fruit is to be hanged from the tree he stole it from. That's all. What do you say?" The King said yes, because since his trouble he cared for nothing but building, and his royal soul longed to see the green Clover Hill eaten up by yellow brick caterpillars with slate tops. He did not at all like building the 2 red brick walls, but he did it. Now, the old woman wanted the walls and the acres to be this sort of shape. Circles. But it was such a bother getting the exact amount of ground into the 2 circles that all the surveyors tore out their hair by handfuls, and at last the King said, "Oh, bother, do it this way," and drew a plan on the back of an old Act of Parliament. So they did, and it was like this: squares. The old lady was very vexed when she found that there was only one wall between her orchard and the world, as you see was the case at the corner where the 2 1s and the 15 meet. But the King said he couldn't afford to build it all over again, and that she'd got her 2 walls as she had said. So she had to put up with it. Only she insisted on the King's getting her a fierce bulldog to fly at the throat of anyone who should come over the wall at that weak point, where the 2 1s join on to the 15. So he got her a stout bulldog whose name was Martha, and brought it in himself in a jewelled leash. "Martha will fly at anyone who is not of kingly blood," said he. "Of course, she wouldn't dream of biting a royal person, but then on the other hand royal people don't rob orchards." So the old woman had to be contented. She tied Martha up in the unprotected corner of her inner enclosure, and then she planted little baby apple trees, and had a house built, and sat down in it, and waited. And the King was almost happy. The creepy, crawly yellow caterpillars ate up Clover Hill, all except the little green crown on the top, where the apple trees were, and the 2 red brick walls, and the little house, and the old woman. The poor Queen went on seeing to the jam, and the pickles, and the blanket washing, and the spring cleaning, and every now and then she would say to her husband, "Fortunatus, my love, do you really think Miss Fitzroy Robinson is trustworthy? Shall we ever see our Daisy again?" And the King would rumple his fair hair with his hands till it stuck out like cheese straws under his crown, and answer, "My dear, you must be patient. You know we had the very highest references." Now, one day the new yellow brick town the King had built had a delightful experience. 6 handsome princes on beautiful white horses came riding through the dusty little streets. The housings of their chargers shone with silver embroidery and gleaming glowing jewels, and their gold armour flashed so gloriously in the sun that all the little children clapped their hands, and the princes' faces were so young and kind and handsome that all the old women said, "Bless their pretty hearts." Now, of course, you will not need to be told that these 6 princes were looking for the 6 grown-up princesses who had been so happy at the select boarding establishment. Their 6 royal fathers, who lived many years' journey away on the other side of the world, and had not yet heard that the princesses were mislaid, had given Miss Fitzroy Robinson's address to these princes, and instructed them to marry the 6 princesses without delay, and bring them home. But when they got to the select boarding establishment for the daughters of respectable monarchs, the house was closed, and a card was in the window, saying that this desirable villa residence was to be let on moderate terms, furnished or otherwise. The wax fruit under the glass shade still showed attractively through the dusty panes. The 6 princes looked through the window by turns. They were charmed with the furniture, and the refining touch of a woman's hand drew them like a magnet. They took the house, but they had their meals at the palace by the King's special invitation. King Fortunatus told the princes the dreadful story of the disappearance of the entire select school, and each prince swore by his sword hilt and his honour that he would find out the particular princess that he was to marry, or perish in the attempt. For, of course, each prince was to marry one princess, mentioned by name in his instructions, and not one of the others. The first night that the princes spent in the furnished house passed quietly enough. So did the 2nd, and the 3rd, and the 4th, 5th, and 6th. But on the 7th night, as the princes sat playing spillikins in the schoolroom, they suddenly heard a voice that was not any of theirs. It said, "Open up, Africa." The Princess looked here